Welcome to the next episode of Inner Being Club, Voices of Experiences. We have today Andrew Wood, who would talk to us about education in Ontario and how COVID is affecting it. Please let me welcome Andrew Wood. Andrew?
Okay, well, thank you, Sarab, and hello, everyone. It's great to see you guys and our viewers as well. I don't know about education in Ontario. Certainly, that's part of it. I think I'd rather speak more generally about the question: online learning versus in classroom learning. It's a very complex topic. As we do this, it's September 2nd, 2020. And so many of our school jurisdictions in our country, in America, and around the world are either starting already their fall school programs or they're about to. And it is such a fraught topic, it is just not one that is amenable to easy solutions in this time of COVID-19. Online learning, in-class learning, because of the pandemic, in-class learning is entirely compromised. So the online learning is de facto a large part of the way we're going to go. And the question is, how should it be shaped? What should it be looked like? What are the advantages, and there are, and what are the disadvantages? There's so many things we can talk about. It's a vast area, and it's an expanding area. The society as a whole has been going in this direction for the past 10, 15 years or more. It's been taken up first by the colleges and universities, not surprisingly. Let's establish some of our terms here. I was doing some research before I came online here, just to try to fill up my head a little bit with some facts. We've got to distinguish between pure online learning, where it's all happening online, a kind of a hybrid option, where there's a live teacher as well as some stuff that is, quote, canned. There's in-person classes that don't include any of the technology. We've got to discuss whether these things are being directed towards adults or towards children, because that's an entirely different thing. There's live online teaching and learning, canned online or teaching and learning. So it's not one subject, it's a huge subject. So to go quickly through it, let's talk about the obvious in terms of the places where it is most well adapted and where it works. For example, the massive open online courses that the universities offer and have offered for a number of years, they're marvelous. I've been learning from Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, which, of course, many of you know, for many months now. His lectures have been posted online, and of course, he has millions of viewers. And I'm learning a tremendous amount through those. And I would never have any opportunity to benefit from his erudition and his insights without without his having posted his lectures online. And I'm tremendously grateful for that. And don't lose sight of the fact too that it's free. So I can tune into these things anytime I want, and I often do, actually. I use these lectures to go to bed to very often, the last thoughts before I sleep. And so there's an example where there's no downside. That's 100% upside. Okay, there's other places too. I'm no longer employed by the school board because I've retired, but in the last few years, there were a number of places where we teachers in the Toronto board, and there's 10,000 people employed by that board, where we would take courses online, short courses, things like workplace hazardous materials, that kind of a thing, health and safety protocols, And those were short online courses. We would click on those, you know, and they would play. And then we would certify afterwards that we had listened and learned from these things. And that seemed to be just the right solution. Who wants to go to some central school or some central place to hear a lecture or information that you might have heard 5 times annually for the past number of years? No, just click a button, have it play. But you know, then you're starting to get into questions here, because I have lots of colleagues who would click on those buttons and play those courses, and then they'd wander off and clean up their classrooms and do other things that are no doubt important as well. But the point is, there's no accountability, of course. So you know, it's just fraught. But but I'm saying I support that, because that's the way it needs to be done. But let's be more specific now in terms of my discussion about the whole issue of coming back to school for the kids. Now you're getting into a problem, because you know what? Online learning cannot be optimal for young children, especially for children just entering their teen years, and for adolescents. It cannot be optimal. And anyone telling you that it is optimal and that there's no compromise is full of it. You mustn't imagine that going to school for children is just about learning their ABCs and learning to add and subtract. No, certainly not. It's the social interactions with their peers that is at least as important as what might happen during the lesson in many ways. You know, it's what happens in the schoolyard between kids trying to sort out a disagreement, you know, whose soccer ball is that, and who hit who first, and the friendships that form, and just everything, you know. That's what school is about, essentially, in many ways. And so, of course, once you go online, then you surrendered that. But on the other hand, if we are under the thumb of a pandemic, then we had better turn that way and make the best use of it that we can. Now, I do have experience in this, because for the past 6 months, ever since the pandemic was triggered, I've been working daily online, teaching daily online, and 90-minute classes, 4 or 5 a day. I've just become a teaching machine. So if no one currently has any more experience in teaching in this pandemic than I can claim myself, and my experience is positive in many ways. Now, I do have the advantage of teaching a community of children who happen to be Canadian Chinese. That's just the school I work for. But the parents are educated, first of all, and the homes generally have all the technology that they need in order to make it happen. And the students come into it with a background in being accustomed and acculturated to the value of learning. So I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying that the kids aren't all individuals. Some profit and some don't. But by and large, it's working. And not long term. I would not recommend this, you know, as the solution for all time to come. But I do think that there's some value in it. Also, if I had a child that age, and of course I know many people who do, they're making different decisions, I would send my child back to the classroom. I would make that choice. I think that there is more value in being in the classroom, you know, with whatever concerns there might be, than keeping them at home for fear of contracting something. Al, what do you want to say? Al, you got your hand up.
You've made a point as to the distinction of what can, I think you're coming on to the distinction of what can be taught in the classroom online and what cannot. And I would like to suggest something that cannot, and that is physical skills. For example, first aid training. When I do first aid training every 2 to 3 years to keep my skills refreshed, and every time I have to go in and I have to demonstrate how I can do an arm sling, how to do first aid for somebody who's had a heart condition, to put on a bandage and all of these things. And simply watching that online is not going to work,
No.
because there's something that is called muscle memory, which you learn about if you go into, say, if you have a personal trainer, they'll push on you. You have to do repetitive exercises in order to get your mind into what you're doing. Another one I would think of is probably language training, insofar as you have to train your mind by speaking the language in order to learn something. I'm not sure you can do that. Well, you probably can do it online.
Oh, yes,
But
you can.
I think it's a little more difficult than
Well,
doing it in class. Much more difficult, in fact.
Yeah, well, these things, we can discuss them endlessly. No, you can do language learning online. And it says it's one of the most popular applications of the internet. We all know Duolingo.com. I've spent many hundreds, if not thousands of hours on Duolingo. I used to introduce my grade 4 or 5 French students to Duolingo right at the outset of their French training, because it's just a great tool. It's a tool. It's not going to teach you to become bilingual, but it's a tool. It's a good tool, and it can set them up for some.
Well, may I interject here, Andrew?
Yeah.
May I interject here? Duolingo, is that one person interacting with a program, or is it a group of people interacting with the program?
Oh, no, you're interacting with it by yourself. No, but it's
So
very
it's
well set up.
one-on-one.
Well, yes, if you're not familiar with it, I think you should investigate it, actually. Duolingo.
I agree. Excuse me.
Yeah.
But it's a one-on-one where you're interacting with the computer. It's not like when you have a class, say 4 or 5 or even a dozen students in an online setting.
Yeah, well, it's one model, and it's an effective model, I think, for online learning. I was living in China last year, and I made it a point to do my Duolingo daily for learning Chinese. And it was convenient. I could do it whenever I wanted to, whether that was early in the morning or later at night. I could spend as much time as I wanted, sometimes 15 minutes, sometimes an hour. It was free, for heaven's sake. How much better do you want it than that? And I had all the native Chinese speakers, I think about 1.6 billion of them, anyway, available to me to help me practice if I wanted that kind of practice. But for me, that was wonderful. But, coming back here to Canada in the winter, I'm not doing it anymore. Too busy. I will pick it up.
Let me just say this. I've been listening to you both now for a while, and I gotta say there is merit for obviously both, and there is a place for both of them. The question is that, especially with COVID right now, and the concerns that a lot of people have when they're, first of all, in the classroom setting right now, although Canada is in a relatively good shape from a COVID perspective, the biggest fear is a resurgence of it, like a second wave, right? So even if they are in the same classroom together, they have to be socially distant. The question comes in, can you keep the kids socially distant, especially at the younger ages? High schoolers, other than the rebellious side of it, I could understand that a lot of them are going to be following suit, but kids of kindergarten or grade 1 through 5, that is a big problem to do. And the other thing is, Andrew, forgive me, let me say this. And you as a teacher have expressed this in the past, if I recall. How do you keep their attention virtually? Right? Where in the classroom you do have that physicality that you can come in and kind of observe what's going on and correct the behavior in a way, because you're there in person, whereas virtually you really don't have that ability to do it because you're distant and you're not sure what they're doing off screen while they're listening to you or pretending.
Well, all those are excellent questions. I was trying to answer your first question first, actually, because you said, how is social distancing going to happen? Is that going to work? And I was going to answer that question for you because I can answer it definitively and I can answer it finally, and let there be no more debate about it.
Let's hear it.
It can't work and it won't work and it's not going to work. I mean, so any suggestion that it is going to work is it's either hypocrisy, which is one possibility, or it's foolishness, which is the other possibility. But neither of those things are recommendable. So so forget it. Yeah.
Why can't it work?
Well, it cannot work because people are people, and kids are young people. And I'm not saying it's going to be a failure every day in every single situation, but overall. And I'm thinking from my perspective as a former kindergarten teacher and primary grade teacher, I mean, it is absurd beyond belief to pretend that 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds are going to have the self-discipline necessary to maintain 2 meters between each other and to keep their masks on all day. We can encourage it, and I'm sure they will encourage it to the extent that they can. But realistically speaking, I cannot see myself as a teacher continually haranguing the children and carping on the children, you know, put on your mask, put on your mask, put on your mask, like a broken record. And that's what they're going to have to do, basically, you know, and stay apart, move over there. Tommy, you move over and don't come back. You know, I mean, I already spend enough of my time scolding kids in the classroom already in my former career. I didn't even like to hear myself. But if you add the mask thing and the social distancing thing to all the reasons why, you know, you want to correct the children's behavior, that's a lot. And okay, so there is that. Yeah. Well, all of these questions, of course, none of them are easy. I wanted to just make one point, though, and Saurabh, you haven't come in yet. I wanted to make one point, is that for young children, they don't have the skills to learn online. They just don't. You can plant them in front of a computer and, you know, and play something for them or talk to them, but it's not education. That's not education for a young person. Education for a young person is in the group. It's in the moment. It's in the classroom. It's in front of the teacher. That's my opinion anyway.
Well, yeah, go ahead, Saurabh, go ahead.
But regarding the opening of schools, the Ontario government has decided it's a hybrid model. People are all sending the school, or there are some people who will not send their children to school and they do online learning and plus physical learning. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to, in the Toastmasters meeting, we had a half an hour to kill. So we did a viewpoint. And my topic was, should kids go to school or should not they go to school? There were two teams and they debated on that. And of course, the answer was we're going because the government has decided. Yeah. They all agreed with what you were saying, that they don't want to send them to school. Half the people were sending them to school.
Well, there are so many allied and related questions. I mean, we need to get the economy going. And when the parents are stuck at home, you know, with their 7 and 9 and 13-year-olds, and they can't return to work, there's a real cost there. There's an absolute cost there. And let's talk about the stress involved for the parents too. I mean,
well, Andrew, what you're talking about is a social model that has been adopted over the last 50 years that has allowed women to leave the homes and not be the caregivers and actually participate in the economy. And the pressure right now is to get those families back into that circulation, or to get people back to work and put the children into school so that they can be, shall we say, warehoused and looked after while the parents are at work. It is, and for people in a lower income status, that is with particularly people that may be having 2 or maybe even 3 part-time jobs, that becomes a very important question. And it also leads into another item that you kind of inferred on, which is that the parental supervision is very important for online learning. If the parent is there making sure that the children are doing the online learning with your classes, chances are they'll be more successful. But if the child is, or the young person is at home and the parent isn't there, without supervision, that young person is probably not going to pay attention to you. there has to be something, a whip, shall we say, to make them, or at least to force them to focus their attention, which is something you do get in a classroom. A child cannot, presumably, well, of course, the teacher would probably take away their cell phones and stuff like that if they had them. And I think that in some schools, they have been, last year, they were talking about denying children access to cell phones and tablets and stuff like this in the school, forcing them to pay attention. There was a story about it last year about how France was imposing that regulation on their schools, and I believe it's the same. We had similar things happening last year as well, forcing the students to pay attention in class. Well, if the parents are there, they're going to do it too, because they're better. They're probably better than the teacher at that, because they have the ultimate responsibility for their own children. They want their children to succeed in life. Fine, do your homework, kid. Whereas if we don't have that, then I would suggest that's another hurdle that where online learning is not going to succeed. It will always succeed, I think, with intelligent children and people who are dedicated to learning. But if you don't have that dedication and you don't have somebody pushing you, you got a problem.
Yeah. Well, there's much to what you say. You've actually introduced a slightly different question into the conversation, which is worthy of discussion as well. And of course, that's the use of handheld devices and mobile devices while you're in the actual classroom. That's not quite the same question, I think, and I think that's problematic as well. Although there are plenty of lessons where the kids take out their Chromebooks and you put them on the Chromebooks right in the classroom, and that's been happening for years too. And even the having the parents nearby can be problematic. I mean, you're right in the point that you're saying that the parents there to ensure that help ensure that that they're focusing on the work that can be beneficial. On the other hand, a lot of these parents for the kids that I teach are hovering right there, just out of range of the camera. And they are like, listening to every moment of the lesson and kibitzing with the child. And I don't need that. I think that's too much. And I'm not comfortable with that. So you've got to strike a balance between these things. As the teacher, it's very intrusive. Yeah. Correct.
Alex, Andrew, can you tell us an anecdote when you were actually a teacher, when you were in primary school, interesting problems you had and something funny what happened during your...
Well, I can't distill a 25-year career into something funny. You know what? It's always...
That's funny.
Yeah, well, I very much appreciate the challenge involved in acculturating and civilizing the very young ones, when they come in and they're new to the school experience and that whole thing. That's an adventure. And it requires a very good educator, by the way. Do not for a moment disparage the primary school teachers as somehow having an easier job or the job being less complex. If anything, it's just as complex, if not more complex, because you've got to deal with so many more things than simply communicating curriculum. But children are delightful in the aggregate, not necessarily in the specific at this moment, but in the aggregate overall, it's a delightful experience. And it's a privilege to work with children and to see, where the younger generation are coming from and what's important to them and where they're going and what their challenges are. And they are so different nowadays than they were even a few years ago. Every generation is so different. Yeah.
Can I ask something, Andrew, here, which you just brought up, and it kind of just got a little thought that came to my mind.
Yeah.
As a teacher, you set a curriculum for every classroom setting every day. Has virtual teaching change the way that you would you instruct children in the curriculum perspective, or
Yeah,
timing and whatever, interaction, that kind of thing?
yeah, yeah. That's a good question. I'm going to admit to you a couple of things, Mario, but this is a secret now. I don't want you to tell anyone. I used to pay less attention to curriculum when I was teaching for the school board than the school board and the government of Ontario would have wanted me to. Not that I ignored curriculum, but I did not sit down for an hour with my curriculum handbooks, figuring out exactly which expectations I wanted to cover today, and dotting those I's and crossing those T's. I just took a more holistic approach. And maybe that was because I had some experience and I kind of knew what had worked in the past and what was going to work this time. So basically my response to your question is that I didn't worry about it that much in terms of the curriculum in particular. And now I'm in a fortunate position where I'm not giving the kids grades, and I'm not passing them on to the next level in school. I'm not producing a final report card. It's a private school I teach for. It's enrichment. And so the kids get from it what they get from it. And if they get a lot from it, great. If they don't get so much from it, too bad. But
do you think in a public school setting, would the lesson plan change because of the virtual nature of it?
Well, the actual answer is it has to change in terms of the delivery of it, because if there are certain things you want to do, science class is an obvious example where you want the hands-on, you want the kids handling the materials and weighing things and being in that, and you cannot teach that. It comes back to what Al was saying earlier. There's lots of things that you cannot teach in a virtual world. So yes, it would impact that. But finally, though, Mario, and I'll toe the government line on this, there are expectations that are carved in stone for each grade. And those are the expectations you're supposed to hit. Well, supposed to hit, and those are immutable. So so there's a limit to how much you can do with that. But I don't think, honestly, I don't think most experienced teachers are worried about hitting every single little expectation with every single lesson. You can't. Well, let me just say a little bit about this, can I? The government spends millions, of course, developing curriculum, but what they do is they develop it in a silo. Like each subject has their curriculum. You've got the math, you've got the language, you've got the phys ed, you've got the arts. But what would happen overall is that if you're actually going to deliver all of those expectations, you'd have to have 2 school years for every actual school year, because of course each discipline multiplies their expectations. And so it's totally unreasonable, which is where the hypocrisy word comes in. And I do tend to use the word hypocrisy from time to time when I talk about modern education. Anyway.
Maybe that's just ambition. If you don't have ambition about what you can teach people or how much they can learn, if you set your sights too low, well, you'll never excel. So by setting your standards high, even if though they are unreasonably high, you have better outcomes.
Yeah, well, you can call it ambition if you like, Mr. Brown.
Is that possible?
I'll call it foolishness. Sarab?
Yeah, I was saying we have just enough time to give you a chance to give us a call to action to all our listeners of what they're taking away from this talk.
Well, okay, call to action. There's huge value in the communal experience for young children. I'm not talking college, university here, for children. Grade school, middle school, high school children just being together. So I think there is an imperative, there's a social imperative to try to get them back in as safe circumstances as we can, knowing it's not going to be perfect. Yeah, Mario?
No, I was agreeing with what you're saying as far as safety being first. The bottom line is this: when we are looking at this pandemic right now, we're talking about lives, right?
Yeah.
And yes, they're young. Yes, they're supposedly more stronger to be able to cope with getting COVID. But recently, we've seen how neurologically COVID can affect people. Beyond just the common cold symptomology, there's a lot more things that are happening that we're not really clear about yet about how COVID reacts.
Set up.
So I think it's actually very important that we keep a safety first approach. And I agree with what our premier was saying yesterday, that if he sees something that happens, he will shut things down. And that is a prudent step. We just can't open the doors and let the barnyard open and the horses out and never being able to reel it back in again, because that is a formula for disaster. So my action point that I would say to the parents and to people out there is be on the alert, be on top of everything, check with your children, make sure that their interactions are okay. I'm not talking about correcting the behavior, but making sure in a nice way they understand that they are in a situation where it could be life and death, if not for them, at least perhaps for the parents themselves or the grandparents. And that behavior has to be considered, even at a young age. And believe me, some people say kids can't handle that kind of an approach at youth. I can tell you this. Sure. I've experienced that as a young child, and you mature and grow a lot faster.
No.
Responsible.
No. I'm not.
I'm not saying that you are.
I did not mean to suggest earlier when I said that the children are going to be completely irresponsible.
No, I'm not saying that for you.
I was speaking in terms of the aggregate, and I was speaking in terms of overall. But before we close this podcast, there's something that we have not talked about here during this thing, which is yet crucial. And that is the whole question of the teacher's point of view. We haven't even mentioned here the teacher's point of view. They've got to come into work in a situation where it is not safe. By definition, it is not safe. And we're expecting them to cope with this and to do what, and to be caregivers and parents and teachers and doctors and nurses, all of this at the same time, which they're not necessarily qualified.
Maybe we can cover that in a different, on another episode, an upcoming episode. Yeah.
Yeah, but let's not neglect that aspect of it, though.
Yeah. Gentlemen, I think we should sum up here.
Yeah.
Saram.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. I think this is all the time we have. Till the next episode, we're going to talk about what the teachers are going to having problems with COVID. That's the next topic. Till now, thank you very much. We had Mario Kirikides, Alex Brown, Andrea Wood, and myself, Saurabh Sandhu in the studio. Have a good day. Thank you.
Okay.